industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insights to the driver lifecycle as we discuss the industry's greatest challenges, driver recruiting and retention. I appreciate all the positive feedback on the show. Please remember to rate and review Taking the High Road on whatever platform you use to listen. Now, as we kick off National Women's History Month, I'm honored to be joined by a woman who I respect and admire deeply, a woman who's made significant history in the trucking industry, and a woman I've had the privilege of calling a friend for more than a decade, Amy Boerger, the first female product engineer and first woman vice president, who's joining us on the eve of retirement from a nearly 40-year career with the 104-year-old global power technology company that is Cummins, Inc. Amy, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Jeremy, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. And you kind of summed up my career and the Cummins history in like 2 words. So,
well, I cannot express how grateful I am to have you on the show. And from what I understand, this is your very first podcast interview. So, what an honor.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'll let you lead me through it.
Well, I'm anxious to dive into your background, what attracted you to the trucking industry and how your experience as a woman in the industry has evolved over nearly 40 years. And I'd also like to talk about your pending retirement. Congratulations to you on that, by the way, and what you feel the future holds for both you as well as for the industry. And I also want to be sure we discuss all the great work Cummins is doing as well. And I certainly want to include a question from our audience during our deeper dive segment. Does all of that work for you?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, before we even dive in, I'm curious if you have any book recommendations for the audience. Anything recent that you've read that was impactful to you.
So I tend a lot anymore towards a lot of suspense and thrillers, but I'm not going to go there because I'm going to go back a few years to a book that I think impacted me tremendously both from a personal and a business standpoint, called True North. It's about authentic leadership. We actually read it for one of the executive development courses that we took at Cummins, and gosh, it teaches you how to build your life story, and how your life stories affect where you're going, from what you're trying to do, both personally and business. And, it led me to be this, I lead by example to support others. And, as I went back through my life stories, it was, just a great example of growing up in a small community, coming to an industry which feels like a small community, and always being able to support others. So it's a book I highly recommend to folks as well.
Well, thank you for that. I wrote that down, and you've said a few things that I know we're going to unpack here shortly, especially leading by example. I've got a ton of examples of you leading by example, and then the community that is the trucking industry. But even before we get there, if you could share, how did you get your start in the trucking industry? What inspired you to pursue a career in this industry?
Well, actually, Jeremy, quite simple. I got an engineering degree from Valparaiso University. Started looking for where I wanted to spend at least part of my career, and I had an older brother who was working at Cummins, and thought, gosh, if he liked it there, he'd been there for 5 years, I'd at least give it a shot. So I came into engineering and into our main engine plant in product engineering. As you so rightly said, probably the first product engineer female in what was back then our heavy duty engine plant. And it didn't take me long to both love the company. And then after 3 years, I got out of engineering, and got my first taste of the industry. And for the next 36 of my 39 years, I've spent somewhere in the North American trucking industry. And it's, if it's not the company that kept me here, it was certainly the industry. It's an absolutely amazing industry, as you well know. That's, it's a collaborative industry, even though it's a competitive industry, and it's built on relationships, which, once again, is where I love to spend my time.
It's unique for sure. And I think you and I first met, I believe it was during a call in Washington 10 to 15 years ago with the Indiana Motor Truck Association. And ever since, I've always enjoyed the opportunity to spend time with you at so many other, industry events. And And there's something, like we said, very special about this industry. And, I say it all the time, when you give it your heart and you really embrace it, it embraces you right back. And relationships made in this industry can last a lifetime and be so rewarding. On the topic of relationships, you talked recently in an interview with CCJ about how COVID-19 sort of turned the industry on its ear, but that the nature of the industry, focus on relationships, has stayed the same. What relationships in the industry, have helped shape your career? Any particular relationships?
Well, I'd be remiss by not starting out by saying I probably had some absolutely fantastic managers back from the start of my engineering day who supported me in what was mostly an all male plant, but then certainly in the trucking industry, people who weren't afraid to give me very, very hard constructive criticism, but resonated well and helped me out through my career. So I'd start there, but then, gosh, when you look around any of the industry, I could point to hundreds of people who have impacted me, who have helped me both grow personally and professionally. There's no shortage of people in this trucking industry who offer their help willingly without being asked for. So, I'm not sure I could pick out any in the industry in particular, but boy, certainly a lot of support.
Well, after nearly 40 years, I can imagine the number of relationships that you have built over those years that I know are hopefully are watching this episode and proud and honored to have the opportunity to know you, to work with you. This is an important month, right? March is National Women's History Month, and you've made significant history both at Cummins and in the trucking industry. I think of you as a servant leader, and you mentioned, leading by example. And so here are a few. You've been on the board of directors for both the ATA and the TCA. You have served on ATRI's Research Advisory Committee. You've been part of Women in Trucking. You also currently sit on the advisory board for ATA's Women in Motion. And you've also served on the executive leadership team of the Allied Committee for the Trucking Industry, Act One, for 7 years. And you were instrumental in my involvement in that elite group of vendor partners to the industry. That's leading by example and being a servant, how I've always described you. Can you share, maybe, or describe your experience as a young woman getting into the industry nearly 40 years ago and how it has changed or evolved over time? You mentioned being at Cummins and, being one of the, only women amongst the product team to now. How has that changed or evolved?
Well, certainly it's I wouldn't say it's a much more inclusive, but it's a much more diverse industry. Whether you look at females or race or any other part of diversity. I think when somebody asked me this earlier, I said it wasn't so much being female. When I first came into the industry, it was being young, because you wanted to be seen as somebody who knew something, who could bring something to the table, who could support others. So being young was just as much for me personally a barrier, or perceived barrier, as anything else that may have existed. So I joke that I always wanted to be older, so age has never really bothered me. But it's definitely changed. I mean, you look around at the industry events now, and it's a much different picture than what it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, we certainly while we have probably come a long way, kind of to your point, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. I know in one of our recent Act One meetings, we talked about just the importance of diversity and recognizing that there's a lot of room for improvement is good, right? So, but then there is diversity that we're probably not leveraging enough and highlighting enough to continue to attract a greater level of diversity. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunity going forward. And by the way, I know I wasn't intending to bring up Jose at all, who's going to be taking over as you retire, but I love that guy. He personifies all of the same things that we talk about He's got so much great energy, genuine. And I've only gotten to know him maybe 2 or 3 years at best, but always another guy that I look forward to seeing in the industry at events. And so I think that says a lot about the importance that Cummins puts into that role and into the industry in general. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and boy, Jeremy, I'll tell you, it makes it easier for me to walk away from the company and from the industry, without any regrets and without looking back, because I know we'll be in good hands.
Yeah, he's got a heart of gold. What advice do you have for people, especially, those from, historically under represented groups, which are interested in, pursuing a career in the trucking industry or in transportation in general? Any advice on how they can maybe best position themselves for success?
Gosh, step in, lean in. You kind of said it earlier. If you give your heart to what you're doing, you're accepted, well accepted, and this industry is a very accepting industry for people who truly care, and who shows it cares. I think a number of the opportunities I've gotten over the years is both because I've said, hey, I'd be delighted to help in, I'd be delighted to help out, I'd be delighted to step into this. But boy, as long as you throw your heart and soul into it and truly care, I think this industry accepts, anybody. So it's, whether it's from a driver to a technician, where I know we're doing a lot of work from a diversity standpoint as well, all the way up through the ranks. I just say step in. It's an amazing industry.
Yeah, well said. You're very close to a lot that's shaping the future of trucking. Can you maybe talk about Cummins' vision for the future of the on-highway transportation industry and how Cummins is working to achieve that vision?
Yeah, sure. We announced a Destination Zero strategy just over a year ago on our plan to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. I've listened to a number of the trucking companies now, with their sustainability goals, trying to figure out what does that look like. And I think we have a path forward for folks to figure out what that looks like, where it's not just a stair-step event. So it's, how do you gradually get there with products in use today, with internal combustion engines? What are those alternative fuels in the future that might lend itself to a sustainability goal that a customer may have, but still allows them to do the job that they need to do with their piece of equipment in a reasonably cost-centered environment, as well as sustainable. So, whether it's a hydrogen internal combustion, natural gas, renewable diesel, or these next generation of products as well, because the industry is a myriad of duty cycles for everything that customers need to do. So not one size fits all. So we're trying to figure out, what does that continuum look like, and how can we help people at every point there do work that makes sense for them, with the products that make sense for them.
Are you sensing, or have you been experiencing as we continue to evolve, is there a greater sense of an embracing of, and I'm going to ask this question all over again, because what's the word I'm looking for that you mentioned? I'm calling time out here. You mentioned a sustainability. That's the word I was looking for, and I should have written it down. Okay, here's my question. 3, 2, 1. As we've evolved over the last few years, have you maybe noticed a greater sense of embracing of sustainability amongst, fleet owners? Has that been something that has been more of a priority to them than maybe it was, 5-10 years ago?
Oh, definitely. I'd say not only because the impending regulations are changing, both from a, CARB standpoint or EPA standpoint, but also just this desire to get to a net carbon, and how do you leave the world in a better place than what it is today. So yeah, I think we've seen a number of trucking companies over the last several years trying to figure out, what does that look like for them, and what's the most meaningful, path forward for them. So yeah, it's not just regulations, but it's also this desire, I think, for a more sustainable environment.
Now, how do you, that's, I was asking that question sort of looking backwards. How do you see the transportation industry evolving in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, and what opportunities or challenges do you anticipate?
Well, I think the number of products and the proliferation of products will probably continue to grow. We've run natural gas engines for, I don't know, 20 years. The newest natural gas products are that much more efficient. But I think you'll see, like I mentioned earlier, the internal combustion engine, being a platform that can support other fuels as well. So whether that's a hydrogen internal combustion engine, or whether it's a hydrogen fuel cell, whether it's a battery fuel cell, I think you'll see a number of those start to play out, depending on, once again, the duty cycle of the equipment that's doing the work for the customer. And I think we believe we'll have technologies that will fit in most of those cases. And it's an exciting time, I think, to be in the industry, because you stand the chance of making that difference, and developing a lot of new technologies, hopefully very reliably, but that will do the work that the customers need.
Well, and so often when I think, at least earlier in my career, I'm approaching 20 years in the industry, I think of, when I think of Cummins, I always thought of this, industrial type of company, not even recognizing until more recently what a powerhouse technology company it really is, and probably has always been. I just didn't realize it. But visiting, being able to go down at different board meeting events in Indiana, and go out and visit the Cummins facility, a couple of their facilities in Columbus, Indiana, was eye-opening. What an awesome experience, and just a great company and great supporter of the industry. So I think this may be a good opportunity. Just before we run out of time, I do want to make sure that we get to the deeper dive question from one of our listeners, and this is it's a question I see fairly often, and I think it makes sense for the audience, especially who are primarily in the recruiting and retention facet of the industry. The question is, I keep hearing that autonomous trucks are going to be the end of the truck driver career. How concerned should I be about that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of my thoughts, Jeremy, and then I'll let you. I mean, you're dealing with this every day with drivers as well, but there's different levels of automation, and I think as we go into the future, some of them are already in play. Whether that's lane assist, whether that's assisted, cruise control. I think you'll continue to see more of those become more widespread. My opinion is the truck driver has a long history. There's more than just sitting behind a wheel that a truck driver does to do his work kind of day in and day out. And I do think it's a long road of, just as it is with alternative fuel products, it's a long road for us all to get there. And so how do you do that from it's not just a stair step. You do it kind of in a graduated way that brings apart that which is most feasible at the right point in time. But I don't see a driver being replaced for a long period of time. And depending on the operation he's running in, he plays a way more important role than just sitting behind a wheel and driving.
Well, and I share that sentiment, and I would say, you and I both, I believe, have electric vehicles, right? And I'm not sure if yours does this, but mine can drive itself. And I use that quite a bit when I'm headed on a long trip down mostly, highways. But it's but I'm also, I'm still pretty much 10 and 2 because I don't trust it enough anyway, and I'd like to live. So
it's a good safe way to do it.
Right. Now I say that to say that the technology is there to a minimum, at least at a minimum level, and it's obviously continuing to evolve over time. But that being said, the ability, I say this all the time to people who ask this question, or anybody who's on the outside of the industry who says, I'm not sure if I want to get involved because of this. And I say, we fly, right? We travel all the time. That plane will fly itself. and has been doing this for decades. Yet there's never not a pilot, two pilots usually in the cockpit. And I can't even fathom the idea of boarding a plane and hearing, folks, today's flight is completely unmanned by a pilot. It's, nobody wants to fly on that plane. Nobody's going to be that. And that is pretty safe. I mean, you have the takeoff and the landing, but otherwise everything else is far less challenging than what we would have or experience in a car or in a commercial vehicle on roads. And of course, there's the weather issues and stuff like that. So yeah, 100% agree. I don't think that's a realistic. Trains even, you still have a conductor, and that's on a track. I mean, that's right. Really, so I think for those concerned about that, I think it's not realistic. I think it's just like in an airplane, for example, it's going to enhance or improve that conductor or that pilot's experience, that driver's experience, versus replace them altogether.
Right. And maybe do it in a more safe environment as well.
Oh, certainly. Safety would be, sort of a core principle behind it. Absolutely. It's certainly not labor reduction. It's I think more in the vein of safety. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, with your retirement coming in March, what's next? What's next for Amy Boerger?
Well, hopefully a lot more time with friends and family. Folks where I try to fit people into a one time a year. I'll get to see multiple times a year. So, and a lot more time outside. So, and staying in Indiana. So hopefully I'll see some good friends from Indiana still around the state and folks in the industry.
Well, you've always been real active, right? You enjoy hiking and that sort of thing. I expect you'd be able to do a lot more of that now.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it.
Well, I hope I'm not leaving Indiana either. So I look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amy. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you at such a momentous point in your professional and personal life, and can't wait to see you again and give you a great big celebratory hug.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
And thanks for joining me for another episode of Taking the Higher Road and for spreading the word to your industry peers. We really appreciate it. And remember, you can submit any questions or comments, including those which may appear on upcoming Deeper Dive segments, at podcast@driverreach.com. And don't forget to rate and review Taking the Higher Road, whatever platform you use to listen. Until next time, thank you for taking the higher road.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but right. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open face sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on Freightwaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
The weirdest show in freight? Catch your nooner with Dooner right here on Freightwaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time, or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at freightwaves.com.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.